Hello, everyone, colleagues and friends. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar hosted by the Clean Energy Ministerial CCUS initiative. Thank you for tuning in to today's program. I am Juho Lipponen, coordinator of the CEM CCUS initiative, and I'll be your host today. And today we'll be talking about Canada and Canada's carbon management strategy. And we also have a sign language interpretation available at today's event. So the Clean Energy Ministerial is a global process to accelerate clean energy. The CEM has 29 member countries across the world, really, east and west, north and south, and over 90% of the global clean energy investment is done within the CEM countries, but also so are 3/4 of global CO2 emissions. So this is a very relevant global partnership. Now, under the CEM, there are a number of work streams, including your host today, the CCUS initiative. And this is a group of 15 countries with the objective to accelerate CCUS together. And Canada is one of the initial founding members. And I'd also like to highlight that our latest member is Germany, who just joined us this September. And our 15 members all have CCUS programs either firmly in place or being prepared. And through this international collaboration, we share best practice and help each other to accelerate CCUS solutions. Before starting on today's main topic, I wanted to highlight a recent major development, which is the Carbon Management Challenge. The challenge was initially launched at the Major Economies Forum meeting in April, early in the year, and has been gathering speed over the past 6 months, culminating in a high-level roundtable that was held at the COP28, hosted by the COP presidency. And the roundtable really stressed the need to deploy carbon management solutions as one part of the toolkit to keep the 1.5-degree goal alive. And so the challenge really gave high-level support for carbon management. The challenge is basically a call to action to ramp carbon management technologies to gigaton scale by 2030, which is, as we know, a wonderfully challenging goal. Countries that have signed up are shown on this slide, and the door is open for further countries to join. And in case you're wondering about the term carbon management, you may have heard about this more and more in the past months. Carbon management basically includes both plain vanilla CCS, CCUS, as well as carbon dioxide removal, or CDR. And there's a website marked down bottom right-hand side of the slide, so please check the website there for further information. And if this is the first time you hear about this challenge, I'm sure that this will not be the last time, because this will really provide a necessary global ambition level against which the CEM CCUS initiative, its members, and many partner organizations who we work with to continue to accelerate the deployment of carbon management. So then on to today's topic. It's a great pleasure to introduce today's webinar, which is about Canada's carbon management strategy. Canada is a long-term pioneer country in carbon management, host of several large-scale projects, considerable industrial capability to undertake carbon management, and also real-life policy-making experience in driving the sector forward. A couple of months ago, a new carbon management strategy was published, and today we're going to hear all about it. And this is exciting, as it's interesting to know what Canada plans to do next against the great experience it already has. And we have two presenters at today's event. Jason Gadouri, Senior Director of Policy and Planning, and Saviz Mortazavi, Portfolio Director, both from the Office of Energy R&D at Natural Resources Canada. And so Jason and Savis will take the next 20 minutes or so to present, and we'll come back to questions and discussion after that. And if you want to put through questions, please do that through the Q&A function on Zoom. And we'll keep the total duration to 45 minutes. With that, again, welcome everybody, and I'm going to turn it over to Jason and Savis.
Thank you so much, Juho. I'll share my screen. Okay, can you see that okay? Wonderful. Well, thanks, Juho, again, and for hosting us today. It's a pleasure to be here and to give a bit of an overview of Canada's carbon management strategy. As you mentioned, this is an effort that's been led by Natural Resources Canada, which is where Savis and I work. And I'm also happy to be joined by members of my team today who are on the call. So just to give you a sense of what I'm going to talk about today, I'll go over 5 things. First, I'll talk a bit about Canada's climate plan, which sets the context for the carbon management strategy. I'll talk about the carbon management strategy itself and some of the key federal supports that we have in place and that we're working on. I'll highlight some of the leadership, which is so important and that's happening at the subnational level, so with our provincial and territorial governments, as well as by industry. And then lastly, I'll talk about how we're working internationally to advance carbon management. So Canada has a national climate plan, and we've had a series of plans that have become increasingly stringent since 2016. That's the graph on the left that shows our ambition for 2030. Our most recent 2030 emissions reduction plan has our most ambitious target yet, with a 40 to 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 over 2005 levels. The graph on the right reflects our emissions projections to 2030 and Canada's sector-by-sector approach to emissions reduction. Carbon management is a key pillar of Canada's climate plan, which aligns with what we see in the net zero pathways from, for example, the IEA and the IPCC. Mature carbon management technologies show up across all scenarios for Canada to meet both 2030 and 2050 goals. Carbon removals are also expected to play a key role in addressing residual emissions, particularly for 2050. I mean, the first priority in Canada's climate plan is to avoid new emissions wherever possible, but carbon management is an important part of a broader toolkit for decarbonization that also emphasizes other measures like end-use electrification enabled by clean electricity generation, clean fuels, and low-carbon hydrogen. So it's part of the mix amongst other key measures. Our strategy, as you mentioned, for carbon management was launched in September. And we actually rebranded through the development process from what had originally been envisioned as a CCUS strategy. And now we're reflecting carbon management to reflect the important role that carbon dioxide removal is going to have in addition to point source CCUS. The strategy had a very inclusive development process as a result of more than a year of engagement with nearly 1,500 stakeholders from various sectors, industry, different levels of government, Indigenous organizations, academia, and many others. Fundamentally, the strategy sets a vision for realizing the potential of carbon management to help achieve climate goals while growing a multi-billion-dollar domestic sector that can generate good jobs. The strategy presents a roadmap to 2050 where solutions continue to mature, driven by innovation and investment, and opening up new opportunities to reduce and remove emissions. So the strategy outlines 5 low-carbon pathways where we see carbon management playing an important role. So here we're talking about decarbonizing heavy industry, such as cement, steel, oil and gas, producing low-carbon hydrogen, supporting clean power generation, carbon dioxide removal to address residual and historic emissions, as well as growing CO2-based industries that can use CO2 in products and materials. Canada is also approaching carbon management as an opportunity for clean economic growth. We see a number of opportunities across different regions and provinces as well as an opportunity to stimulate innovation by driving development and deployment of carbon management. You mentioned we've been in the space for some time. We were an early leader in carbon management with significant activity across federal and provincial governments, industry, and innovators across the country. We feel we've built a number of foundational advantages that position us well to compete in a global carbon management sector, including a robust and established policy and regulatory environment, abundant geological storage potential and emerging CO2 uses, research and test centers across the country, as well as strong existing expertise and collaboration. We have trouble keeping this map up to date. We need to add dots because there's new things going on and emerging all the time in this space in Canada. So I'll talk about where the strategy is taking us and the focus that it brings to our efforts. It outlines 5 federal priorities that support the 5 low carbon pathways that I mentioned a little earlier. So first, a focus on accelerating innovation and research, continuing to advance policies and regulations, attracting investment and trade, scaling up projects and infrastructure, and building partnerships and growing an inclusive workforce. So I'll talk a bit more about these now. So on the innovation side, our objectives really are about enabling the development, scale up, and improvement of technologies for carbon management, as well as geological science to further quantify and develop Canada's CO2 storage potential. For example, the Office of Energy R&D, where Savise and I work, is currently investing $319 million in carbon management RD&D to help improve the commercial viability of those technologies. We're also supporting significant and wide-ranging work across national research centers, again, to advance the technologies, develop analytical tools, and generate knowledge that can help grow the sector. We're also supporting a wide range of domestic and international collaborations to help drive carbon management innovation. And looking forward, we see opportunities to further accelerate innovation and RD&D, as well as further our work on geologic characterization. So lots going on, but we still see plenty to do in this space. On advancing policies and regulations, we're focused on ensuring that regulatory frameworks underpin the safe and responsible development of carbon management tech, taking a collaborative approach that recognizes distinct responsibilities between federal and subnational governments, and working with partners to advance codes and standards that can promote international alignment, sharing Canada's expertise, and helping to evolve the industry as it grows. We're meeting these objectives by implementing a suite of investment tools, incentives, and regulatory frameworks. This includes, for instance, a rising price on carbon, carbon capture, use, and storage investment tax credit, which Savise will talk a little bit more about in a few moments, sector-specific regulations for clean electricity, clean fuels, and oil and gas. Just last week, Canada released a framework for an oil and gas sector greenhouse gas emissions cap. And so there are a number of efforts happening here on the incentive side. We also have a mechanism to work formally with subnational governments or provinces to collaborate on carbon management policies and regulations that we call the regional energy and resource tables. Moving forward, Canada is going to continue to take an adaptive approach to support the industry as it grows, with a focus on durable, predictable, and enabling policy measures. This includes, for example, developing a framework for CO2 storage on federal lands and the offshore, building market demand for low carbon products through government procurement as well. In terms of attracting trade and investment, we're focused on continuing to expand Canada's opportunities to capitalize on foreign investment as we see international competition growing in the carbon management space. And so our aim is to position Canadian firms to capture domestic market opportunities, as well as turn Canadian technologies into global solutions. We're meeting these objectives by providing a competitive investment environment through a balanced mix of policy and programming supports. That includes, for example, trade promotion efforts through our national or international trade commissioner service network, as well as designing federal measures that are intended to be stackable, which means that firms can leverage multiple supports to accelerate their growth, whether they be federal or provincial. So that stackability is an added incentive. In the future, we're looking to continue to advance carbon management specific policies and incentives with a view to attracting foreign direct investment, as well as expanding public procurement efforts. So on scaling up projects and infrastructure, the goal really is to ensure that we develop and deploy those high impact carbon management projects along with supporting infrastructure so that we can realize the potential of the sector. We're doing this in various ways, including supporting planning and decision-making across the country on carbon management, for example, through a CCUS assessment framework that was developed by our federal laboratories and that is being used by different levels of government to assess their opportunities. The federal government is also funding commercial scale domestic carbon management infrastructure along the value chain through a variety of measures. So for example, we have an $8 billion net zero accelerator fund. Our Canada Infrastructure Bank is supporting FEED studies in the carbon management space, and as well as the CCUS investment tax credit, which I mentioned. I jumped ahead, but what I'll say is all of this is underpinned by regional infrastructure planning in coordination with subnational governments and Indigenous partners. We're really working at all levels to try to plan and structure the development of carbon management across Canada. Looking ahead, we see more opportunity to work with the private sector to support financing of carbon management projects through different tools, for example, through blended finance approaches. We also will continue to support strategic investments in key industrial sectors to spur large-scale projects and advance hub development, including through, for example, a key initiative, which is the $15 billion Canada Growth Fund. So now onto the slide that I switched to a little too quickly, but on building partnerships and growing inclusive workforces, the goal really is to build a diverse and inclusive workforce that leverages existing skill sets in industry and also offers new employment opportunities. And here we're taking action in a number of ways. I mentioned the inclusive approach to developing the strategy itself. So having that wide range of stakeholders to help shape and inform the strategy was a key important step for us. Recently, we also released Canada's interim sustainable jobs plan and tabled related legislation. The CCUS investment tax credit itself has labor requirements built in, and we've also expanded our Indigenous Natural Resources Partnership Program. Looking forward, we see opportunities to further identify potential workforce gaps and hone in on those regional opportunities to enable inclusive workforce participation, as well as build public awareness and confidence in carbon management solutions. So this is a bit of a summary slide. I mentioned a range of federal supports there in the previous slides. They're advancing development and deployment of carbon management technologies. And this is a broader framework that we use to talk about how Canada is supporting clean economy development, including carbon management. And essentially what you have at the foundation are measures like pollution pricing and regulations, which are supported by broad-based commercial deployment supports. And those are complemented by strategic financing for key projects. And then at the very tip of the triangle, targeted programs and procurement efforts. So there's a lot going on, but there's also a kind of a policy framework approach that we take to carbon management and other areas of clean tech. I've talked about subnational governments a few times. A lot of leadership happening at the provincial and territorial level in Canada to strengthen the policy and investment environment. I won't go through all of this, but we'll note Alberta, for example, has many incentives, including a carbon pricing system, funding supports, and a process to develop carbon capture storage hubs. British Columbia and Saskatchewan, also in the west, have been early movers. Both are eligible jurisdictions for storage under the federal CCUS investment tax credit and home to world-leading projects. Other provinces, such as Ontario, are taking steps to advance regulatory frameworks and strategies for CO2 storage. And on our East Coast, we see significant offshore geologic storage potential, and both the provinces of Newfoundland and Labrador are keen to pursue this, and we're working together to help develop hubs. And they also have the opportunity, as in other parts of the country, to leverage transferable oil and gas expertise as they build out their carbon management sector. This is a case study example in Alberta of Canada's first CCUS hub called the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line. This is a 240-kilometer CO2 pipeline that links capture and storage sites and has a design capacity of 14.6 megatons of CO2 per year, with excess capacity to connect more facilities in the future. Newly announced is a 40-kilometer extension that includes an agreement to transport CO2 from a net zero hydrogen energy complex, which is currently under construction. This is the first hub in Alberta and in Canada, but the Alberta government continues to allocate carbon sequestration rights through a competitive process to enable more carbon management storage hubs. On the industry side, lots going on. We're seeing the industry make big strides in the carbon management space. We're home to 8 of the 48 operating commercial scale projects in the world at the moment, and we're also a top 3 country in terms of projects in the pipeline with 41 planned projects. Canadian projects are demonstrating point source capture rates of over 90% at various facilities. And we have innovative Canadian companies that are receiving global recognition through various accolades, including the Global Clean Tech 100 list, as well as X Prize awards winners. I definitely will not try to go over this slide, but just to give you a sense of the number and the range of companies operating across the carbon management value chain, including capture, transport, storage, and utilization. So I'll turn it over now to Savise to talk a little bit more about the CCUS investment tax credit.
Thank you, Jason. As Jason mentioned, among one of the key measures that Canada is putting forward as tools for the industry with the intention to deploy the acceleration of large-scale projects in CCUS. And I will speak a little bit slower because I know it's being translated. So my apologies. So the CCUS investment tax credit, in addition to 4 other investment tax credits that were announced in budgets in 2021, 22, and 2023, which was tabled during the economic updates. Recent economic updates include CCUS investment tax credit, clean hydrogen investment tax credit, clean electricity, and there's also the clean manufacturing, clean technology manufacturing tax credit, and clean technology adoption tax credit. And when you look at CCUS, is almost a cross-cutting, which interacts with many of these different investment tax credits. And Natural Resources Canada, also based on what has been announced, will play a key role in the implementation of many of these. Focusing on the CCUS investment tax credit, this is a refundable investment tax credit that is applicable to projects that permanently capture CO2 and store it in 2 recognized end uses, which is geological storage and also concrete sequestration in concrete. Currently, from a utilization pathway, sequestration in concrete is the only recognized pathway for CO2 use and use. However, this is something that can change in the future. The expected level of investment between now and 2030 for all the projects that are anticipated to come online, or at least start construction, would be over $7 billion. And the legislation currently is tabled under Bill 60 C-59 in the Parliament, and is going through the legislative process for approval. The CCUS investment tax credit also allows a certain rates for different type of capital investments, which includes 60% for equipment used in direct air capture. For capture equipment or conventional run-of-the-mill capture technologies, such as amine-based capture technologies, cryogenic, etc., is about 50%. 37.5% is dedicated for transportation, storage, and use equipment. And these rates, in order to, as an incentive to accelerate these projects, the rates will drop to by half by 2031, and in 2040 they'll expire. The requirements for the projects to be eligible is storage of CO2. So every project, in order to be eligible for the CCUS investment tax credit, is that they have to store CO2 in prescribed jurisdictions, meaning that these are jurisdictions that Environment and Climate Change Canada has recognized as jurisdictions that they have adequate level of regulatory framework and regulatory regulations that can ensure permanent, safe, and long-term storage of CO2, either in a geological formation or in the form of sequestered in carbon in concrete. Sorry. There's also provisions for dual use in the CCUS investment tax credit that allows that parts of the capital investment that is related to heat and power generation, as well as water management, which is not reflected in this slide. These are also eligible under the number of different classes of equipment that have been identified under the legislation, up to 50%. I should also add that there is also analogs of provincial tax credit that recently was announced, which is Alberta Carbon Capture Incentive, which are also stackable with the federal tax credit that will add additional incentives, and other provinces may or may not bring similar options into play. The other thing to point out is the CCUS investment tax credit also has a provision for maintenance of capital. So there is a refurbishment tax credit that applies to the project after the first day of commercial operation, up to 20 years as the project is operating. Just to quickly touch on the few other investment tax credits that have been announced is the clean hydrogen tax credit, which has different rates that applies to the projects. Sorry, depending on their carbon intensity. I won't go through all of it, but the highest one is about 40%, which is for carbon intensity of 0.75 kilogram of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen produced. The clean electricity tax credit provides 15% credit for eligible investments in non-emitting electricity generation. And if it's, for example, natural gas, it has to be abated natural gas, natural power generation. The clean manufacturing, technology manufacturing allows up to 30% in the cost of investments in new machinery and equipment used for manufacturing or processes for clean technologies, etc. And there is also, for the clean technology adoption, 30% is allocated for net zero technologies and battery and storage solutions. All of the tax credits as mentioned, they have some labor provisions and requirements. And for all the projects, in order to be eligible for 100% of the tax credits available, there are certain labor requirements, which I won't get into it at this point. However, if those labor requirements are not met, then the tax credits may not necessarily be fully allocated to the projects, and there may be penalties. If you go to the next slide, please. So going back to the CCUS investment tax credit, as I mentioned, there are eligibility requirements for the jurisdictions that are, I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice here. The jurisdictions that are being considered as eligible jurisdictions. As I mentioned, the federal government ensures regulatory requirements are met. So Environment and Climate Change Canada, in consultation with Natural Resources Canada, they have developed criteria that are used for assessing and evaluation of the regulatory framework related to CCUS in different provinces, which touches on different aspects of the project life cycle, which looks at from the point of view of site selection, characterization, and in terms of risk assessment, long-term monitoring and verification, post-closure, site management, and so on. And one of the key pieces that I want to flag at the last point, and before passing it back to Jason, is there's a knowledge sharing requirements for projects that have investments of over $250 million. And these projects are required to provide annual performance knowledge sharing reports, which is the type of information required is determined by the Minister of Natural Resources. However, these reports will be collected and will be published in a public domain sort of platform. And obviously with consideration to ensure that the publication of this information is not causing any competitive disadvantage to any of the companies who are participating in this knowledge sharing process. And it does have a penalty attached to it for non-compliance. So I leave it at that, and I'll pass them back to Jason. Thank you.
Thanks, Aviz. So wrapping up, and I think maybe fittingly with a focus on international collaboration, Canada's approach to carbon management includes a strong focus on international engagement, including among many of our SEM members who are, I'm sure, here today. We recently announced our co-sponsorship of the Carbon Management Challenge, which you talked about at the top. A very important initiative to help drive that needed ambition to get to 1 gigaton scale by 2030. Canada is a co-lead of the Mission Innovation carbon dioxide removal mission, along with the US and Saudi Arabia. We're a founding member of the IEA Greenhouse Gas R&D program, which is contributing important technical evidence base for decision makers. Notably, we'll be hosting the IEA GHGT conference in Alberta next year in 2024. We also have a number of bilateral partnerships, which are very important, including with the US, Japan, the European Union, and South Korea. And all those partnerships include a focus on working together on carbon management. So all these activities we feel promote shared economic opportunities, facilitate knowledge sharing, and can help us all advance bilateral efforts on development and deployment of carbon management. So to sum up, I guess a few takeaways that I hope you've taken from the presentation today. For Canada, carbon management is an essential pillar of our climate plan and our plan for clean economic growth. We've got a number of strong foundations in place built over many years, and with an early start, we've got a comprehensive strategy and a strong suite of policy measures to grow the sector in Canada. We have leadership coming from all levels of government and industry with strong collaboration with communities and Indigenous groups. And we're committed to international collaboration and knowledge sharing to realize the potential that we need from carbon management globally as a key pillar of addressing climate change. And with that, thank you for your time, and I'll pass it back to you.
Wonderful. Many thanks, Jason and Saviz, for the presentation. And yeah, really listening to this, the old pioneer is not an old dog. This is something really forward-looking, and you're accelerating speed as you should. So that's really great to hear. And if folks there online, if you have questions, please feel free to put some through to the Q&A. But we can already start with the new themes that we discussed with our speakers before. What is you spoke about the ITC and the tax credits, various other carrots, if you like, that CCUS projects could use. You did mention carbon price as well, and in some ways there's carrots and sticks here. So can you perhaps talk a little bit more about how those two are balanced in your view?
Yeah, happy to. And I think, yeah, that's a good way to put it. Carrots and sticks. As I mentioned, we're using a mix of policy approaches to enable the carbon management sector. And that includes, working across the value chain, the innovation spectrum to support both development and deployment. And that pyramid slide that I showed earlier kind of, I guess, encapsulates the carrots and sticks concept, where at the base of the pyramid, we have which you might call our sticks, which is a rising price on pollution and various regulations that form the base of our approach. As we see in the carbon management space, a rising carbon price can drive innovation. And then we're also working on an offset credit system, and there's opportunities already to generate offsets under our clean fuel regulations, and those provide compliance options and also potential revenue streams to help grow the sector. And that's complemented by our carrots, like the investment tax credit, which helps to reduce the capital burden of getting projects started, the strategic financing of projects, including FEED studies, as well as the targeted R&D programming for first-of-a-kind development. So yeah, I think carrots and sticks is a good way to put it. We are trying to use a range of different mechanisms, and I couldn't even really get into all of them today. I don't know if I even named them all, but yeah, I think that approach, we feel, has a lot of promise. And there's, the ITC itself is fairly recent. It's in the legislation is in our House of Commons at the moment, and at nearly $8 billion, we think will provide a strong incentive on top of the kind of pollution pricing and regulatory approach.
And there's an 8 billion for the CCUS ITC.
Nearly cities, I think it's 7. You mentioned it's 7.8.
About 7.6 between now and 2030, and it could be obviously beyond 2030.
Right.
There's additional investments that could be considered. Yes.
Yeah, great. And it's also really interesting to see how the federal ITC could be stacked with some of the provincial support schemes that could be there. And Savis, you showed that nice slide with the 5 different ITCs that are planned on federal level. I mean, in theory, could a company make use of many of them?
Well, for not necessarily, except for clean hydrogen ITC, where the two processes are separate and they are side by side. However, for most of the other ITCs, for example, clean electricity ITC, they're not stackable, and the companies have to choose between one versus the other. So, for example, in a power generation process, they can either look at the capture side of things in terms of applying to CCUS ITC and get the 50% tax credit for eligible expenditures under that, or looking at the total investment, including the CCUS for the whole power generation process. For example, a combined cycle natural gas process where they can apply for 15% for the whole capital investment. So they're not all stackable, but however, there is for some they are and some they're not.
Right. There was also a clarification question, I think.
So there's enough flexibility for the companies in order to decide which tax credits, and there's also capital cost allowance credits as well for that. Looks at the depreciation rates of investments, which also applies at the same time. However, there is enough flexibility in the system that allows companies to optimize the capital structure of their projects.
Okay. One of the questions in Q&A was about Ontario and Quebec, and the plan to extend ITC to these provinces.
Well, currently,
comment on that?
Environment and Climate Change Canada, as per what was mentioned in the legislation, there are currently 3 jurisdictions that have been approved, meaning that their regulatory framework has been assessed by Environment and Climate Change Canada, and they have been deemed adequate in order to meet the requirements for long-term storage and monitoring and managing that long-term storage of CO2. However, the Environment and Climate Change Canada, as I mentioned, in consultation with Natural Resources Canada, they are engaged with other provinces and territories, and there is a process that every province that they are either developing and amending the regulatory framework to meet the requirements, which we are hoping that over the next year or so, most of the provinces in Canada will become eligible jurisdictions. However, there's also a possibility, for example, for certain jurisdictions within United States that is also would be considered as an eligible jurisdiction, provided that they're also assessed and approved by ECCC. So if there's a province currently that is not within those eligible jurisdictions, but they, for example, from Manitoba to Saskatchewan, they store in Saskatchewan, those projects can still be eligible for CCUS ITC.
Okay, thank you.
So the key is where the CO2 is stored, but
okay, got it. Another point, perhaps it's a more sort of philosophical one, and I don't know, Jason, if you wanted to comment on that, but in the light of ahead of COP, when carbon management was quite often sort of pictured as a false solution, and there were a lot of skeptics about it. What are your thoughts? As does supporting CCUS in some ways artificially extend the life of fossil fuel emissions? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think it's no secret that Canada is a significant oil and gas producer. And noted that there was a significant discussion at COP, and I saw this morning some news about sort of an important commitment that was reached in terms of transitioning away from fossil fuels. During COP28, Canada also released its framework for capping emissions from our oil and gas sector. And if you look at what the government said around that, it's been very clear that we need to move aggressively to largely eliminate the unabated combustion of fossil fuels between now and 2050. Simultaneously, we want to focus on the elimination of emissions related to oil and gas production. So really to ensure that those volumes of oil and gas that continue to be needed and used post-2050 in non-combustion or abated applications are compatible with the net zero future. So the government sees taking aggressive action to reduce emissions from the production of oil and gas as critical to our competitiveness and the relevance of that sector in a net zero future. So we're applying, the pyramid, the carrots and sticks, or whatever you want to call them. We're applying an array of incentives, regulations, investments, and programs for decarbonization, including for the oil and gas sector, and most notably and most recently, the emissions cap for that sector, which we also see, as we mentioned, it is a measure that will help drive carbon management, development, and deployment. Recognizing, carbon management is not just for the oil and gas sector. It's very important for other sectors. We mentioned cement, steel, and the oil and gas sector, at least in Canada, has been one of the early drivers of carbon management. That with the expertise that they have and the investments that they've made have helped get us a kickstart, and we feel can offer a leg up to those other sectors as they adopt carbon management approaches to learn from what's happening in the oil and gas sector. But no, in short, carbon management is going to be an important solution for a lot of sectors. And it's going to address the role and the place of oil and gas in the net zero future as we transition to that future.
Thank you very much. I think sort of the point I think we want to really be also making is that the question is not whether we need carbon management or not. It's more, where is it smart to use it? And I think that's what all these strategies also in the CCUS member countries are about. We're nearly at the end, but if we steal 1 minute of people's time for one last question on international collaboration. Jason, you mentioned that you indeed are a co-lead in the Carbon Management Challenge, very active in many other international groups that advance carbon management. So, how can Canada help countries that might not be as far as you are to accelerate their carbon management programs?
Well, I mentioned the importance that we put on international collaboration, and that includes sharing our experience and our expertise with other countries. We put a big importance on and really value particularly the multilateral initiatives and opportunities that we have to share with other countries, to learn from other countries as well. And on the carbon management challenge itself, I guess really keen to see more countries join on, and very happy coming out of COP28 that we're now at 20 member countries, which I think is a very exciting development. And that's happened very quickly, which I think shows the interest internationally. I mean, fundamentally, like the way that we can contribute, I think first and foremost is to do our job domestically, a lot, with all of the things that we've talked about here today. And then internationally, for us, it's about being at the table. It's about contributing to the conversation. It's about contributing to the technical collaboration that's happening, for example, that Civvies is involved in under MI CDR, and to make sure that knowledge exchange continues, including, as we often do with our initiatives like SEM, bringing industry to the table and creating opportunities for industry and government to connect and share. Civvies mentioned the knowledge sharing provisions under investment tax credit, so that's baked in to the legislation. We see a high degree of importance on the knowledge sharing piece. Overall, I guess my hope is, when we come together, the whole of what we're able to achieve is greater than the sum of the parts, and that we're able to go further by coming together and sharing our experiences.
Excellent. Well, I think that's all we have time for at this event. So thank you very much, Jason and Savvies, for the super insights into Canada's carbon management strategy. And folks out there, if you Google it, you will find a lot of information on the NRCan website on the strategy, and please go and have a look. And we will have a recording of this webinar out on our YouTube channel also just in a few days' time. And please email info@semccus.org if you want to get in touch. So thanks everybody for joining. Jason, Savvies, thanks for your talk. Janet, thank you for the interpretation. And have a good day, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Juho.